what they understand is that you could paralyze Western thinking with the word dialogue. And then what happens when you bring, whether it's a religious organization or a political or a media organization, dialogue is a Linskiest term. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is, you have people who generically use the word dialogue, and you have to make sure you're not, bringing fire on them. But when you're here like at the OSCE or with the Pope, and they talk about dialogue, you need to understand that as a Linskiest, reduced to meaningless process, where it's about getting someone engaged in a process, and then you get bogged down in the process. Some people will use the word analysis paralysis, where the engines of government, the institutions become seized up, paralyzed. And that is not a side effect of the dialogue, it is the intent of the dialogue. And so my thing is, when you're in a decision-making rule, you're not allowed to dialogue. But my thing is, I know that the NDU, National Defense University, which is the top level national defense school in the United States, the best and the brightest in the U.S. military and the State Department and the other agencies. If you get to go to the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., there's the Army War College, there's the Navy War College, there's the Air Force War College, there's other, but NDU is the crown jewel. And there, for Islam, they require people to read Karen Armstrong.
Okay.
And my take on it is, this is just babble. This is something for a high school child to read. And I say, my problem isn't just that you have her reading Karen Armstrong, that you're professional military officers at the colonel level, and you accept this as reading material at that level. But the point of it with your wife is that and this is, I think, the thing, this is an issue of fact that can be determined by going to the sources. You're basing your definition of jihad on what you're told, or what Karen Armstrong wants you to think. Well, guess what? Just like there's such a thing as a war on poverty and a war on drugs, there is such a thing as the jihad for the inner self. However, it has no doctrinal status. In Islamic law and in the Quran, jihad means to wage war against non-Muslims. And that's a fact. And if she disagrees, she's wrong. But you don't just have to say that. You can tell her the rule. And here is the rule. If you want to know what Islam stands for, there will be a mosque. And in the first strip mall in America, they have strip malls. The first strip mall from the mosque, there will be a little Islamic halal meat shop that will also sell books. And as the mosque builds, they'll separate out over time. So what happens is, there's a rule. The first 5 bookshelves are for non-Muslims who wander in and want to know something about Islam, and they give them exactly what they want to hear. Let's just say there's 100 bookshelves in the halal shop. The back 50 are either in Arabic for the serious Muslim scholar, or they're in Urdu or Pashtun or whatever the local population reflects. But that means 45 of the bookshelves have books on Islam written for English-speaking Muslims, or here it would be Austrian-speaking Muslims, for them to read, that are not for you to read. Remember, you have the first 5. Here comes some squishy person who wants to all get along. Here's the book we want you to read. Okay. What you do, and tell your wife to do this, is you get a book that's written by a Muslim who's recognized in the Islamic community as an authority on the subject, who is writing to a Muslim audience. That, you have to do all 3. Because I used to have a part of my briefing where I would show, here's Nuha Mim Keller, here's what he wrote for you, here's what he wrote for them. And I ask, is he lying? Everybody raises their hand. I said, he's not lying. This is what you are supposed to think. Yeah. This is what you are required to know. And so it has to be written for a Muslim audience. And then say, please show me where you find this greater jihad. Please show me. Because I'm going to show you the 50 books we just bought, and 80 times they talk about jihad, because they'll talk about it twice. Oh, here's a school book for a 7th grader. See, they're teaching jihad. Here is a book of, here's the Tafsir. They're talking jihad. Now, what will happen is, for people who bought this book, I cite these things just so they're there, so you can go back to it. A lot of these things are online, so you can go and look up a tasphere. They have English language on them.
Yeah.
You can go to, in America, I go to USC, University of California, Quran, and the Brotherhood has all the taspheres, all the Qurans, and they have different translations, so that you can pick which translation you think is the best for you. And the thing is,
what does tafsir mean?
Tafsir, T-A-F-S-I-R. Because the Quran is considered the uncreated word of God, unlike in the West, okay, they mean, and the Quran is the pinnacle of all law, okay? Every verse has been doctrinally defined. You don't have a range of interpretation as is commonly understood in the West. A tafsir, T-A-F-S-I-R, are official commentaries on the Quran verses. And they're, you know, I have an English language translation of Tafsir Ibn Kathir. It's considered the best. It's 10 volumes set this big. I also have one that's this big, which is like a desktop version. If you look up the verse, you see what it says, guess what? There's a 99% chance, 200% of the time, that that's what it means at all times. Well, Takia isn't lying to advance yourself. Takia is lying to protect yourself. And I make this point because I think that the word Takia gets overused. Takia is a defensive term because there is Quranic support for the larger idea that because you are in a state of perpetual war, being a Dar al-Islam, you are always allowed to deceive. And so if I had the book of Islamic law here, you know, if everyone wants me to prove this, I can do this. I don't have to prove that Muslims believe this. I could just prove that here's a book of Islamic law that says it, and the people you're working against, if they're the Brotherhood or the OIC, they believe it. I don't have to comment on what every Muslim believes. And there it is. You are obligated to lie if it advances the cause of Islam. Is America at risk from an invasion or like an insurgency inside? The answer would be no. I think that if I could create a distinguishing characteristic, in Europe, you had Muslims emigrate over a period of years. And starting in the 90s, if you want to say, you could pick the year, you started to see with the younger generation, they started to become radicalized. Okay, so you had and the people who were emigrating before that point were basically coming over to get a job. Things were bad. They were not, in the sense that we're talking about, politicized. Okay, and in that sense, the Muslim population is much bigger in Europe than it is in the United States. No question about it. But what is different is, remember I showed you ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, and then NATE? What has happened, and they have the chicks, is they come into certain places and they build these mosques that are massively out of scale to the populations they would be building them. Like, you're building a 5,000 man mosque for 30 Muslims. And the investment is coming from abroad. That's one thing. So you say, and all of a sudden you see this mass migration where, in the places where they're coming into the country, they concentrate in certain places. So
Minnesota
is one of them.
Could I help this gentleman?
Yeah. But let me finish first. Let me finish. 'Cause I want to. So that all raises questions, but I think the main thing is the difference between immigration to Europe as opposed to America is it seems that the immigrants coming over to America are much more coming over on a mission. Not as immigrants. Now, that's not all Muslims. It might not be all, it's not all Muslims, not even be a majority. But you clearly see there's a leadership class coming over with a mission. And so that they're smaller in numbers, but there's more coherence. And if you were to go to America and bump into a cab driver, well, this guy's not one of these people. I said, that's fine, I get that. The issue is their success at penetrating the media and penetrating the political elites. So they're adopting these languages in this narrative that you see at the OSCE, so that despite the fact that their numbers don't reflect it, you see the same thing going on there that you see going on here. So it's their influence out of proportion to their numbers over there. But they clearly have, if you take a look at, I'm one of those people, and I argue it, that the countering violent extremism narrative is a narrative, and it's hostile. And it's hostile to Westerners, it's hostile to the United States, because we have laws on countering terrorism. And when our FBI is doing CVE, which was everything they talked about at the OSCE,
well, what does that mean?
Countering violent extremism. If you go on Google and start looking for classes on the CVE, you'll find half the classes are in the Middle East. You'll find half the people teaching it here are from the Middle East. The CVE is to talk about things in a way that don't raise the central issue. And it's funny that no matter how much, like in America, if you read an article in Time magazine about violent extremism, it might start with a picture of bin Laden, but it always ends with someone who talks about the Constitution. You see, here's the underlying, this is where the left and the Islam come together. When I say Islam, I mean like the Brotherhood. Here's where they come together. They both want to destroy the concept of nation, nationality. They both want to destroy concepts of identity. They both want to destroy the old order. There's perfect correlation there. And so what is violent extremism? Violent extremism is if you believe in something enough that you'll stand up for it, that makes you extreme. Because there's nothing worth standing up for. In the postmodern narrative, because there are no facts, there is no truth. Now, other people say because there is no truth, there are no facts. I mean, okay. Therefore, if you believe in something enough to stand up for it, what you believe religiously, what you believe for your country as a nationality, you're a racist and you're an extremist. Okay? If you're willing to say, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and you actually go fight a war and come back, well, you're a violent extremist. I use this analogy because I'm sure nobody's aware of it. DHS was classifying as examples of violent extremism returning veterans for no other reason that they were returning veterans. Because they believed in something enough to take an oath to it and then defend it. So I will argue that when you hear your people talking, whoever you are, violent extremism, it's a narrative that we have records from the Department of Homeland Security of the United States that the people who sat in the meetings to set it up were the Muslim Brotherhood. They were there. Imam Majid, all the people. And it's in my book.
It's an invasion. It's an invasion.
But the point is, that, well, how do you call it an invasion when they're invited in? But the point is, so when you understand that the Brotherhood, we had to get, there's something called Freedom of Information Act in America where you can force the government to disclose documents. And so we got the documents to prove that the people who helped set up the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security's violent extremism protocols, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, by name. So that's where I think there's a disparity. Yes, sir. I think that that's a whole book. But I think that the thing to do is to set up, there is a Muslim Brotherhood. They have clear command and control. They're not fractured, except for the fact that they operate in one country at one level, and they have a mechanism by which if you get your arms around it, get your mind around it, you can understand it. And they have certain levels of command and control, so they operate at certain stages in certain places. They are separate from Saudi Arabia. The distinguishing factor between Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Sunni world is Saudi Arabia, and you can throw into that Kuwait, Qatar, and I think UAE, well, partly maybe, is that they're Wahhabis. The thing of it is, the Saudis in the Arab world have always been kind of the backwater people. If you take a map of the Ottoman Empire, they have all these crooked lines for all the vilayets, but they always have a straight line cutting off the Najd Desert, because that's where those crazy Arabs from the desert were. And they're crazy. We can't deal with them. And this would be where the House of Saud formed. And the reason I'm saying this is because when they found oil, it's like the Beverly Hillbillies running the show. Up from the ground came some bubbling crude. And so they've been able to call the shots. In truth, Sunnis believe generally that Wahhabism is a heretical belief that has been contained inside the Najd Desert and the Persian Gulf, precisely because only these crazy people believed it, that nobody wanted to go there anyway. But here's the thing. The Saudi royal family is so big, it would be like one of these old dynasties from the medieval period. If a revolution was going to come, you would have your family on one side, in Saudi Arabia, you have a third of your family on one side, a third of your family in this group, and a third of your family in this group. So no matter who wins, the House of Saud goes on. But what people don't realize about the House of Saud is the paternal name of the House of Saud comes from Abdul Aziz. It's called the House of Saud. But the maternal name of the House of Saud is the House of Wahhab. And that Wahhab went around the Najd Desert and he bumped into this a warlord named Abdul Aziz, and it said, you know how you guys are all raiding? I'm being fast and loose here. Okay, if someone wants to quote me in a historical, I can do the 1 hour discussion, or I can cut to the quick here. Okay, Abdul Aziz said, you know, if you understand my understanding of Islam, okay, then you should understand that when you invade that tribe, you just take a couple cattle and, you could take the whole tribe, and you could make them come over to your side. And he said, well, we'll do that. And so Wahhab became the imam for Abdul Aziz, and they went raiding and created this big army. It was so bad that when they went into Najaf, they killed every Shiite in there. To this day, the Shiite war cry, jihad cry, is about Najaf. Okay, so they're killing people left and right. And so the Ottoman Caliph comes up and forms an army formed by Muhammad Ali. He goes down to Egypt to form an army. It takes him 10 years to catch him. They catch him. They give him an un-Islamic execution. Why am I saying this? The maternal name. Wahhab said, this is a great thing. Why don't you have your son marry my daughter? And that's the formation of the House of Saud. So people say, well, the Saudi royal family has to give up Wahhabism. It's literally in the genetic code of that family. Okay? So they can never undo it. So getting to your question and answer, you have to always understand that there's that line that always separates groups like the Brotherhood, which are not Wahhabi, but they are Salafi. Okay? Wahhabism comes within the smallest of the four doctrinal schools is the Hanbali school of Islamic law. And inside the Hanbali school of Islamic law, you had a man in the, I think, 11th or 12th century named Ibn Taymiyyah. And this man Ibn Taymiyyah lived at a time where they were fighting the Mongols, and some of the Mongols converted to Islam, but it's because they were, I can't remember what the word is, where they just adopted any religion, and they never really believed in anything. So here they saw these Mongols converting to Islam and disobeying every rule. So Ibn Taymiyyah starts becoming a jihadi, fighting these people because they're apostates. Well, up until this point, you couldn't put another Muslim to death for apostasy, so he created this concept called takfirism. Have you heard this phrase before? Takfirism is a concept in Taymiyyah Islamic law that only exists in the Hanbali school, that says that when you have non-performing Muslims, and they have strict criteria. I don't want to make it out like it's. They have their strict criteria where we should make this judgment. When they violate certain canons of Islam, you could treat them like infidels for the purpose of fighting them because they become takfir. A couple centuries later, I think about 300 years later, in 1750, you have Wahhab, and he has his actual theology is kind of boring. If you see Wahhabis fighting with other Sunnis, it's about whether they should have gravestones. And so, when I used to work in the job I had that I will not mention, I would say, listen, when you're in Iraq and you hear them fighting about whether they should get rid of the gravestones and they rename a mosque, Ibn Taymiyyah Mosque, that's an Al-Qaeda. They're setting up shop there. Well, we can't call them that because that's what the Iraqis call foreigners. Well, they're called foreigners because they're from Saudi Arabia. And they're also called foreigners because they have a foreign concept of Islam. Oh, you can't make those statements. I kind of did. But anyhow, so what you have is a situation where you have Wahhab come, and he puts his Wahhabist views nested in Taymiyyah Islamic law, which has takfir, which is in the Hanbali school. 80% of the Sunni Muslim world has never been Hanbali. And 50% of the Hanbali school was never Taymiyyah. But when you have the House of Saud, the house in Kuwait, they're Wahhabis. This dramatically separates them from the rest of the Sunni world, and especially the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood operates primarily out of Egypt. The Saudis have historically funded them a lot, although not recently. Why? Because it tends to be that when the Saudis got oil, most of the people in the Saudi desert were illiterate. They didn't know how to run their systems. So they brought in Egyptians. They brought in Palestinians to help run their school. So, of course, you have the brother of Sayyid Qutb, Muhammad Qutb. He's at Jeddah. He teaches there. What happens is you see that relationship started getting difficult over the last number of years. Mainly because what? The Saudis can run these systems by themselves, they see these people as foreigners and they push them out. But the go back and forth of the Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda is because on certain levels their doctrines are the same. On other levels their doctrines really conflict because it's Wahhabism. And Wahhabism has a limited pool of people they can recruit from, and the Wahhabis. And that's a finite population. So I think when you can develop the things that drive, the central lines over which they orient around, you can actually play that game. We were basically saying, you know, I have to figure out how to say this. Last year, how many times, is it the first 400 times that you got fooled by this? Where a group decides to break off from al-Nusra or ISIS because they want to be moderate. You decide to train them and give them equipment because now they're moderate. And all of a sudden they quit, and how could it happen? They all quit that group and went back to ISIS. You say, is it the 50th time this happened that you were surprised? Again? And it's like, so the question becomes, I think you hit it right. They are able to form relationships and alliances and flip in a way that I think is completely coherent for them. I don't think that they're in a situation, but when I say it's coherent for them, I fully acknowledge I can track them flipping, I can predict them flipping. I don't ever quite get that they flip like this, because from a Western point of view, if I'm an ally of you, I'm stabbing you in the back. And it just seems that they flow in a different way. Has anybody here been to Cairo?
No.
Okay. You as a Westerner could never survive driving on those roads. The way they drive, it's total chaos. But they never get in an accident. They don't.
How do they do it?
Well, the question, that's an interesting question, but my point is, you have to get over the fact that you may never understand that they flow away, that you can measure that they flip, but you might not ever understand why. That's why it's a different culture. By the way, I'm not making a judgment on that. I remember when I was last in Cairo, watching the traffic go by, and if this were here, there'd be 10 accidents in 5 minutes. And they don't even touch each other. How does that happen? 3 lanes in the road, 10 cars in the road. Always, right? Am I right? So, I don't know, did I answer your question? Okay, I think there are all sorts of groups in the Islamic world, some Muslim Brotherhood, some not. And they go back and forth. A book that was popular a couple of years ago was The Starfish and the Spider and the Starfish. And the point of the book on the Spider and the Starfish is the Western understanding. You have the head department, you have bureaus, you have things, and everything works on a line and block chart, okay? And so you would say if the head of the Brotherhood is here, he must have this person here, and they have that person there.
This is not the case in the Arab world.
It's not the case here. We are spiders. They're starfish. Each element does its thing and has its mission, but if you cut one of the pieces of starfish off, it'll go and become a starfish. And it's the world's most perfect distributed information culture. So that what you have in Islam is you have Islam, which if everybody stopped believing, once someone starts reading Islamic law as it's actually designed, it can rebuild itself. It just can restructure itself. I'm a science fiction fan, even bad science fiction. So I used to watch a TV show called Stargate. Did you ever watch that show?
No.
Well, I can't use the metaphor. But they had these transformers, and no matter how you could break them down, if you energize them, they could reform into what they are. And Muslims may be completely imperfect, and any group of them may have an imperfect understanding of Islam. But Islamic law is crystal clear, so much so that if you knock down and if you destroy it, they work so hard to keep you from reading Islamic law and tell you there are many interpretations. And on one level, that's not untrue, but on another level, it's absolutely clear. And so I'm saying this because the Brotherhood has an absolutely clear command and control, and they have total authority where they act. Now, there may be groups out there that affiliate and are a part, but I will say in the U.S., they're operating on sheet music, but you have to know what the central core is. And it's not a person, even though I will tell you, Kawadari is the leader today. If you killed him, there are any number of people who could replace him and
May I
never
say-
miss a beat.
May I say, it's interesting what the gentleman said, but in the end, they do work together for a common goal, and that is to conquer us. I am convinced of this.
But I think he's also true, the minute we're gone, you're gonna have them fight with the left, but before you have that, you'll have the Wahhabis fight with the Brotherhood. And the Brotherhood represents, close to 1 billion Muslims, and Wahhabis represent close to 100 million. We know who's gonna win that.
Even in